Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Over Pesach and after Pesach, a number of interesting shilas came in, halachic shilas, and I thought could be fun and interesting to review some of the shilas that came in and what the psak halacha is, and yihirotz shalei kosher with halacha. Hopefully, everything is correct. So, on last day of Yom Tov, while I was outside during Yizkar, somebody came over to me with a bit of a panic that they have a gas stove, which had the fire lit for Yom Tov, and the fire went out. So if the fire goes out and the gas is still burning, obviously that's dangerous. So somebody in his house, the fire went out and the gas is burning. So instinctively, they turned the fire off and back on. So now his question was, I turned on the fire in Yom Tov, am I allowed to cook on this fire? Or, the way he presented the shadow to me, the alternative would have been to ask a goy to turn off and back on the fire. The way he said it to me was, my wife said to me, let's ask a goy to turn the fire off and back on. But I said to her, we can't do that because in that case, it would be Bishul Akum. So, let's unpack it slowly. First of all, the halacha is, it's already in the Mishnah in Bayam, that you're not allowed to light a new fire on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to light a new fire on Yom Tov in any which way you could possibly ignite a new fire. When we were kids, the Rambam actually describes this. I don't know if they allow kids to do this anymore, but I can clearly remember standing in the hallway in school during recess and taking a magnifying glass and a piece of paper, and you would get the sun through the window and you were able to start a fire on the piece of paper, and then you would quickly stamp it out before the principal came. So the Rambam actually describes that. Anyway, so the Rambam says in Hilchos Yom Tov, Perek Daled, in the beginning, one of the ways to create a fire, he says, Klizach Kosher is chuchis melei amayim shemanich noisa k'neged ein hashemesh at sheyach zenikol apishton v'chayutz b'v'yadlik. The Rambam basically describes exactly that process. Anyway, so you're not allowed to light the fire in Yom Tov. Why are you not allowed to fire in Yom Tov? So it's a little bit of a machlekes, but l'maisa, the way the poskim take when we go through the various shilas, some aspects we'll elaborate on, and some aspects I'll just go through briefly. So without getting into all the different shittas and the different pilpulim, the halacha l'maisa, the way the Magen Avraham paskins and the way the Bach paskins and the way the Alter Rebbe paskins, is that the reason you're not allowed to light a new fire in Yom Tov is only, maybe only is not appropriate, but only because you could have done it before Yom Tov. In other words, anything general, we only allow us to, even though Melecha Seichel Nefesh is mutar on Yom Tov, but if it's something that could have been done before Yom Tov, so then there's many details, but then in general we're going to be more machmir because you could have done it before Yom Tov. So you could always light a fire before Yom Tov, so therefore you can't light it on Yom Tov. Cooking, you can't cook before Yom Tov because the result won't be the same. The food that's cooked fresh is much better than food that was cooked yesterday, especially at the time pre-refrigeration. So that's why you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, but to light a fire, you could have done before Yom Tov. And based on this, the Maggid Mishnah says, and this brought lahalacha, again, like I said, the Magen Avraham, the Bach, the Alter Rebbe, that b'diavad, if a person did light a fire on Yom Tov, even if he did it b'mezid, and certainly like in this case that he did it b'shogeg, you are allowed to use it. So if a person lights a fire on Shabbos, and then you're not allowed to use it for anything. But if a person lights a fire on Yom Tov, even though he wasn't allowed to, b'diavad, you are allowed to use that fire. So in this case, he absolutely was allowed to cook on the fire that he accidentally, or whoever it was, accidentally turned on when the fire went out. Now, concerning the second part of his shaila about asking the goy to turn it off and on, so I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of Amir L'Nochri, But I do want to clarify the other aspect that he said, because he said obviously it would have been a bad idea to ask a guy to do anything in this case. But again, I don't want to get into the details of Amir al-Nakhri right now. However, I do want to address the second point that he said, because that's a mistake that I've heard from a number of people. And I've actually been surprised sometimes that people who I would expect to be more knowledgeable, they make this mistake. So it seems that this is a mistake that's easy to make. So I want to clarify it. People know that if a Yid turns on a fire, it's Bishul Yisrael. In other words, Chazal said you're not allowed to eat something that was cooked by a Goy, but if a Yid turns on the fire, so then it's considered, even if the Goy cooks it, it's considered to be cooked by a Yid. So people, I've heard a number of times, people extrapolate erroneously that the other way around is a problem, that if a Goy turns on the fire, then it's Bishul Nachri, and you're not allowed to eat it. So it's completely mistaken way of understanding what's going on. The halacha is that a Yid has to, that you're not allowed to eat food, Bishul Akum, you're not allowed to eat, Bishul Nachri, you're not allowed to eat food that was cooked by a Goy. But even if a Goy cooked it, if a Yid had the most minimal amount of participation in the cooking process, so then that's good enough to say that it's been cooked by a Yid, right? So even if a Goy cooked it, and all the Yid did was turn on a fire, or even technically just added some fuel to the fire, that is enough for it to be considered Bishul Yisrael, right? So the other way around wouldn't be a problem. If a Goy turns on a fire and then you use that fire to cook, so then of course it's Bishul Yisrael. You cooked it. The fact that a Goy had some sort of minimal participation and that he turned on the fire doesn't doesn't make it doesn't make it Bishul Akum. So
I was going to say, since, before we get too far away from it, you said turn off the fire. I've been in a room where somebody actually discussed this before they did something about it. Was a little kid, like a 3-year-old, had turned it off and turned it on. Gas was like coming out and there was no flame, and they were discussing something. I jumped up and turned it off. You don't even think about such a thing.
Yeah. Obviously, if there's a danger, 100%. If the fire goes out and there's gas leaking, you have to turn it off. But here the problem was that he didn't just turn it off; he turned it back on. Okay. Now, I just want to, before we move on to the next shaila, I just want to point out that this shaila has tremendous ramifications, or at least potential tremendous other ramifications in other areas of halacha and Yom Tov. So first of all, I'll start. Let's say just on a regular Shabbos, right? If a Yid turns on the light, or does anything with electricity, which in general, when it comes to electricity, we're going to say that usually the way we understand the prohibition of using electricity on Shabbos and Yom Tov is associated with the idea of lighting a fire or a spark or something. So, does this idea, the fact that if a fire was lit on Yom Tov, after the fact you are allowed to use it, does this open the window to more leniency with benefiting from malacha that a Jew did on Yom Tov, right? So if a Jew comes in, I don't know, if a Jew comes in and turns on the light, or even if a Jew drove to me on Shabbos and brought me something, which he couldn't have brought it to me without driving. He's not in walking distance. Yeah. So then, you're not allowed to use it. Yeah. And you're not. If a Jew turns on the light on Shabbos, then you wouldn't be allowed to. Again, there may be certain room for haterim in certain situations, but as a rule, if a Yid turns on the light, you're not allowed to benefit from that light on Shabbos. So can we then say that when it comes to Yom Tov, we can be much more lenient with all these things, because if the nature of the prohibition that was done is that he lit a new fire, so even though he wasn't allowed to do it, but after the fact, we say it would be permissible to benefit from. And this, yes?
What about a dimmer? So the light's already on, and then you turn it up. It's like a fire.
Right. I don't know offhand. It's a good question. I'd have to research that. And where this has tremendous ramifications is in Eretz Yisrael, because as is well known, in Eretz Yisrael, there's a major issue with a major shaila, at least, with using electricity on Shabbos, because the electricity is generated by Jews who are not Shem Shabbos. So many Yidden in Eretz Yisrael are machmir to have a generator that for Shabbos they have their own electricity that's already generated before Shabbos, and they don't use, and on for Shabbos they switch the grid or their home, however exactly it works, to instead of pull electricity from the regular source of power, they pull it from the generator. So there's a whole, not everybody's machmir, and obviously there are haterim, but this is another element. Those who are machmir about using a generator on Shabbos and Eretz Yisrael, are they also machmir to use a generator on Yom Tov? Well, on Yom Tov, do you say that any electricity that was generated by Jews on Yom Tov is after the fact you're allowed to benefit from it? Okay, so I'm not going to I'll leave those as open-ended foods for thought. Okay.
Why were you matter in this particular case when somebody turned on the fire? Keneged halacha, right? It was
because b'diavad
was asik or something, but they did something wrong. But because b'diavad you could benefit from the fire because
absolutely.
it's Yom Tov, not Shabbos.
Exactly. Okay. The lashon in the Alter Rebbe is, and again it's taken from before, is the source of it is the Maggid Mishnah on the Rambam, but the lashon in the Alter Rebbe is V'im avar v'asar mutar lehishtamish b'ha'ish b'yom tov shalei kansu chachamim la'isa melacha b'yom tov k'mei shekansu la'isa melacha b'shabbos hachamura. Okay, so there's a lot more room to be makel on Yom Tov. Exactly how to apply this, we'll have to do some more investigation. Okay. Another shaila, not to elaborate on it at great length, but just to point out, perhaps somewhat of a common shaila. There was one of the days of Yom Tov where it was pouring outside, and somebody asked, can he take a garbage bag and poke a hole in it for his head and use that as sort of a protection from the rain? And the answer is absolutely not. That would be makabapatish. That would basically be creating even though it's disposable, but you're creating a usable keli. You're ripping something, and not in a destructive way, but in a creative way, and that would be absolutely not allowed. I want to talk for a moment about mechiras chametz, because this is something that came up a few times over Chol Hamoed, and I think that the issues are maybe not enough well known. People say they come to the rabbi to sell the chametz. I'm going to also include the names and addresses of my sister, of my cousin, of my brother, of just whatever regular Jews that you know. And even though those Jews are unfortunately not knowledgeable or practicing enough to understand that they have to destroy all the chametz before Pesach, and if they don't, then they have to sell it to a guy, and to actually go to the Rav and appoint the Rav as an agent to sell the chametz for you, etc., etc. But I'll do it for them. Now, l'chayra makes no sense. Like, how could you sell something for somebody else? Imagine if I go to Ari and I tell Ari, here, I'm selling you Zev Rossman's car. What do you mean? I don't have a right to sell your car, right? So how could I go? What?
People do.
It's called a con artist. Yeah. So how could I go to the Rav and say, I have a brother who lives in the suburbs who's not from, I'm going to put his address in and also sell his chametz. How does that work? So without getting into, again, just to briefly touch on the topic, the idea behind it is that you're allowed to do something that a Jew has the power to do something for somebody else that's to his benefit. Not that's right. So I can't sell your car because I don't have a right to sell your car, but I can if I want to give you a gift. I could say, you know what? I'm now acquiring this on behalf of Reb Zev, and now it's yours, and it actually belongs to you because it's a benefit to you to own this. Presumably. So, now, if you choose to reject it and you say for whatever reason it's not to you a benefit, whatever, that's fine. But normally, to own a sefer, let's say, is a benefit. So we'll say, yes, this is, So here, because he's a Jew, and it's forbidden for him to own chametz on Pesach, so selling his chametz is to his benefit, and therefore, I can even without his knowledge afford him the benefit of selling his chametz for him, even without his knowledge. Now, question is, to what extent is that really valid? And there's two. In other words, it certainly couldn't hurt, as they say, right? It couldn't hurt. Does it actually accomplish anything? And there's two ramifications to this question. One is, let's say a person, he knows something, whatever it is, he knows a little bit, he's not so involved, and then you meet him on Pesach and you tell him, this situation is a little bit far-fetched. I just happen to know somebody who it happened to, so it's not completely far-fetched. So, you're not allowed to own chametz today. He said, oh, never heard of such a thing. It's on a chala in Pesach. So, and the guy has a bottle of whiskey in his house. I'm pretty sure all vodkas are not necessarily chametz. A lot of the vodkas are only kidneys, but whiskey is as far as I'm aware, whiskey is always chametz. So he has a bottle of whiskey in his house. So if I can impact him on the importance of this and say, you should really take this bottle of whiskey and pour it down the toilet right now, with a bracha, or you say no, but because his cousin put his address on the form with the rabbi, so now we consider the whiskey sold to a guy. Yeah. So in that case, certainly we would say that we don't, for Issa Deraisa of owning chametz on Pesach, you don't say that, it was sold. If the person himself didn't appoint an agent to sell his chametz, then we would say, no, absolutely, he should get rid of the whiskey on Pesach.
Because it's very likely that it wasn't effective.
Exactly, because it's likely that the sale is not really effective sale for that person. But then the more commonly relevant question is, can I use that person's chametz after Pesach? If chametz was in the ownership of a Jew on Pesach, you're not allowed to use it, right? So let's say I have a brother who lives in the suburbs, and I know I saw people do this. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to put in my brother's address too. I have a brother who's completely, whatever. Now I'm going to go to my brother's house for what's the next time people go? I think July 4th, maybe. Yeah. July 4th. When is Memorial Day?
In May.
Oh, Memorial Day. I'm going to go and have a barbecue in my brother's house, and he's going to pull out a case of beer. Now, he owned that case of beer on Pesach, right? Yes, I wrote his address on the Mechiras Chametz, but was that sale really effective? Am I allowed to go ahead and eat his beer, drink his beer after Pesach? I would err on the side of caution. I would certainly say that unless there's a great need, you should not rely on such a sale. And again, further investigation is required, but I want people at least to be aware that this is an issue, and if you're going to somebody's house in the next few months and he's going to be serving chametz, obviously, again, I'm giving examples of beer and whiskey. Those are things that you could very easily drink out of a plastic cup, even in the home of somebody who doesn't keep kosher. So those are practical examples. I will, however, finish off by pointing out that if it's a person who does usually sell his chametz, meaning he's involved, and whether he's from or at least he's involved enough to understand, and he usually sells his chametz, but for whatever reason this year he forgot, so then there's going to be more reason to be mekel, because there he's already appointed the Rav as his agent to sell his chametz in previous years, and most Rabbanim, I think, include in the shtar that even people who forgot to come to me, but in previous years have designated me as their agent to sell the chametz, they're included. So there's going to be, if it's such a person, there's going to be a lot more room to be lenient.
That's because Zachim Adam Shalom Befanav, you could say it with a little more confidence.
Yes.
That he really wanted you to do.
Yeah, you know that he really wants it, and he's demonstrated that clearly in previous years. Okay, fine. We're going to move on to you wanted to say something, Zaf?
Well, you mentioned about selling chametz, but I know in the community there are rabbis when it comes to Erev Tavshilin, they'll say it on behalf of the whole congregation for those who have forgotten.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
So I actually gave a. Yeah.
So it's consistent with doing that.
Yes, but there it's the opposite. There it's taka to their benefit. Meaning I'm when I to take my egg and my matza and I make an erev tavshilin, it is I'm allowing you to own a portion of that egg and matzah, so to speak, right? So it's taka to your benefit. You're more ownership to you. You become wealthier. Now, by the way, if you look at the, I believe it's on the podcast. The title of the class is "When Ignorance is Bliss" or something like that. Where, ironically, over there it comes out that the eruv tafshilin that I make for somebody else, for the whole city, only helps not for a pshia. It doesn't help if somebody's negligent and he doesn't make an eruv tafshilin. It only helps if it was circumstances not beyond his control, but sort of almost beyond, if God, something extreme. So ironically, dafka for the person who's not connected and not practicing, who has no idea about Erev Tashilin, so he's not being negligent, he just has no idea. So if you don't make an Erev Tashilin, it's not so clear that it helps for you, but for him, it's kind of...
Rabbi, is there no procedure for selling the chametz? The goy sells the chametz back?
Yeah, of course, the Rav buys it back, it's bought back after Pesach, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so is it like automatically in the contract that it's going to be sold back from the goy?
No, we'll have to, that's already a much bigger topic.
There's probably a distinction between different kinds of non-frum relatives. Like some of them would have nothing to do with this, but if you have a relative that's cold about religion or whatever, they're not really involved, but they would go along with it if you kind of talk them into it.
Well, absolutely.
You should probably do the part of talking.
Absolutely. If it's possible, you shouldn't just include their name and thing on the paper. You should go and discuss with them. But another time when this comes relevant is that a lot of shluchim, what they do is, again, shluchim who are rabbanim out there in the field who are catering to many people who are not practicing leisato, more so than standard rabbanim. So what a lot of shluchim do is they'll include sort of their whole mailing list or their whole contact list included in the package, right? So to what is there value in that? Yeah, there's value in it, but to what extent is it actually sort of effective so that you could rely on it to use that person's chametz after Pesach? Not so much.
Right. And some of them are going to say, I don't want anything to do with this, but others will say, knock yourself out. Go ahead, sell my chametz.
Yeah.
See if I care.
Yeah.
So then if you could even get that kind of...
I mean, it does say in the shtar that the goy has permission, if he cannot find the keys and you're not home, he has permission to break down your door. So I don't know if they'll be so happy if the goy breaks down his door to get his whiskey on Pesach.
Right. But if you get him to say, go ahead, do it, then that's at least something.
Yeah. All right. Here's another, two more shilas we're going to cover. So I got a phone call on Matzah Pesach like this. Somebody was driving to work on Erev Pesach, and he noticed in his car he had a chametz knife. And he didn't want to have a chametz knife in his car. I mean, it was a clean knife, but he didn't want to have a clean chametz knife in his car on Pesach. And he was already 10 minutes away from his house, and he was rushing. It was Erev Pesach. So he was driving by a friend's house. So he called a friend and said, here, just take this knife. It's yours. Put it in your chametz kitchen and done with it. Fine. So he takes the knife. It's a milchik knife. And he puts it in his milchik drawer of knives. On Matzah Pesach, they open up the Pesach kitchen, and his wife, I should point out, it says already in Shulchan Aruch, nowadays we're spoiled. You have color-coded, yeah? You can have this color for fleishik and that color for milchik. Once upon a time, they didn't have color-coded, and you had to make an actual siman, like a scratch or something, to know which of your cutlery, which of your knives and dishes are milchik and which are fleishik. And Azoi the Ramah Taka says in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah says in Shulchan Aruch that that's Taka the minhag, and you shouldn't change from the minhag, that you should make the minhag was to make a scratch in your milchik dishes specifically, and so you know what's milchik and what's fleishik. So here, this happens to be that whatever this guy had. By the way, it's interesting to think about because the minhag was to make a scratch. Yeah. Nowadays, I don't know anybody who does this because we have color coded, right? But this story might demonstrate why there's still value in having a scratch, even if you color code it. But I'm not going so far as to suggest that practically you actually have to make scratches in your milchik dishes. But the point is that the milchik chametz knife that Mr. A gave to Mr. B looked identical to the knives that Mr. B uses for fleishik, right? So Mr. B has white handle knives for fleishik, and the guy gave him a white handle knife that's milchik. So on Matzah Pesach, his wife opens the drawer of the milchik dishes and she sees that there's a fleshik knife, what she thinks is a fleshik knife in the milchik drawer, and she goes and she transfers it into the fleshik drawer. And now she has 6 knives together that all look identical. 5 of them are fleshik and 1 of them is milchik. So what do we do about this?
Just toivel them all.
The entire place is
Or
choked up.
kosher or whatever.
Kasha, toivel or kasha? What do you make up your mind? Bensy, no, come on, Bensy. What does toivel mean?
To like, take,
What does toivel mean?
put in a mikvah.
Okay, what does kasha mean?
To make it kosher.
So which one do they have to do?
Toivel.
What? He messed with me. He knows the right answer.
Yeah, obviously.
Fine. Okay, so the emphasis is that this case is a explicit halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Beis. So the point is like this. The principle is like this. Yavish b'yavish chad b'trei batel. If you have forbidden items that mixed up with each other, so then as long as there's more permissible items than forbidden items, it's permissible, right? So let's say you have 100, I don't know, let's say hot dogs, yeah? You have 25 kosher hot dogs. And then there's another non-kosher hot dog that looks and tastes exactly the same. There's no way to differentiate between them, and it falls into the mix. So you have one non-kosher item. You have more kosher items than non-kosher items. So the halacha is that yavish b'yavish chad b'trei batel. You're allowed to eat all the hot dogs. That's
Yeah, but could be
that.
pork hot dog. It could be a pork hot dog.
Well, it could not be. It could not be a pork hot dog.
Taste
A pork hot dog could be differentiated. It would taste different and probably look and smell different. But if it's if it would be a beef hot dog that from non-kosher meat from a cow that wasn't shechted, yes, it's absolutely non-kosher. But the halacha is that it's bottled. You don't need 60. What 60? You need 60 if like the milk mixes into the soup. Then you're not talking about items mixing. There you're talking about a food that has its fleshik in it. So then you need to have 60 times the amount of milk. But here we're talking
Technically,
about
with this hot dog thing, it could be two and one.
yeah, you don't need to have 25. You could have 2 hot dogs and 1. It's fine. Now, the Ramah says that also that you should throw away 1, meaning you know that there's 1 hot dog that's not kosher, so you take 1 hot dog and you throw it out. What are the chances that the hot dog that you take is going to be the one that was actually non-kosher? If you want to use statistics, it's probably not very likely. Hopefully,
Well,
maybe
if
you
it's
have a
free,
siyata deshmaya that Hashem will.
1/3.
1/3.
Why is it that with the mathematical questions you answer correctly and the halachic questions you make fun of? You have to take 1. Hopefully, maybe there's even a siyata deshmaya, an extra dose of hashgacha pratis that Hashem is going to direct you to take the one that's actually us and throw it out. There's no way to know, and you throw out 1 and then it's okay. However, so if you apply that logic to the case of the knives, you have 6 items. I mean, it's possible they're all kosher technically, but it's possible chalav. But basically, 1 is batel and the others. There are some achronim, I think, who say that with possible chalav you can't rely on this, but that's not the normative psak. The normative psak is that if 1 thing mixes in, it's batel, and so technically they should all be kosher. However, the din is adavar sheyesh matirin. You don't say it is not batel. That something that is going to become permissible after some time is not batel. So let's go back to our hot dog example. Let's say you have 5 kosher hot dogs. They're all kosher. 4 of them were cooked on Friday, and 1 of them was cooked on Shabbos. And now it's Shabbos, and you want to eat the hot dogs. So based on the logic we've learned until now, you would say, it's fine. You have 1 that you're not allowed to eat, the one that was cooked on Shabbos. You have 4 of them that were cooked on Friday, which you are allowed to eat. You have a mixture of items. There's more permissible than forbidden items, so it's okay. But here we say no. Here it's a dovish yesh matirin, meaning right now there's 1 forbidden one and 4 permissible ones. But tonight in Matza Shabbos there's going to be 5 permissible ones because the one that you're not allowed to eat on Shabbos is only the one that was cooked on Shabbos. You're only not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. After Shabbos, you're going to be allowed to eat that hot dog. Right? So, in that case, we would say that on Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat any of them. and you have to wait till after Shabbos. And you don't say Chadu Tribar. So the question is, what about back to our case of the knives? Are knives a davar sheyesh matirin or not?
You're saying we're not talking about because we're talking about Pesach. We're talking about after Pesach.
There's nothing to do
right?
with Pesach.
We're talking about the fact that it can be kosher.
Oh, very good. So a knife can also become kosher. It's not the same as the hot dog on Shabbos that all you have to do is wait a few hours and it automatically becomes permissible. You have to do an action to make it permissible. What's that action? You have to kasher the knife, right? But so do you say that you have to kasher? Do you say that it's because you could kasher the knife, it's a davar sheyesh l'matirin, and therefore it is not bottle, and you're not allowed to use any of the knives until you kasher all of them? Or do you say that no, davar sheyesh l'matirin is only if it's automatically going to become permissible after time, like the hot dog that was cooked on Shabbos, but if it's you have to kasher, then you say, no, that's not automatic, and you have to do it, so then it would be bottle. So the answer is, the Ramah says that if kashering it does not involve hitzos merubas, does not involve tremendous expenditure, so then it's called the davar sheyesh l'matirin, it's Ramah in Siman Kuf Beis, and you have to kasher it. So in a case where, so what do you have to do? In other words, by the way, just to point out, anyway, for sure have to kasher one of the knives. Just like in the case of the hot dog, you would have to throw out one hot dog. So you for sure have to kasher one of the knives. So the difference in cost and in and energy or whatever, any resources exerted, the difference between having to kasher one knife and having to kasher 5 knives is minuscule. It's very difficult to argue that would be in any way hitzoros merubas, tremendous cost or tremendous effort, and therefore the halacha is that you have to kasher all of the knives. There could be a case where it would be hitzoros merubas. Let's say if it's a caterer, and the caterer has an event and he needs all these things right now, and he can't wait 24 hours, and he can't spend now hours kashering all his whole kitchen. So there could be cases where it would be a tremendous expenditure. But in this case, first of all, he had already waited 24 hours, so that was not a problem. There had been 8 days in between, right? So even if he needed the knives to prepare for Shabbos, he's already waited 24 hours, and he has to kasher one of the knives right now anyway. So what's the difference between in expense or thing between kashering one knife and 5 knives? Not much. So the halacha is that he had to kasher all the knives. Now the problem is that when it comes to kashering knives, in Shulchan Aruch, in halacha, we're very machmir about kashering knives because can you properly clean them? Nowadays, both the types of knives that we have and the type of cleaning methods that we have, we can get knives to be pretty clean, but there's always still the question about actually can you properly clean the crevice in between the knife and the handle. But in this case, I asked the individual if he had a blowtorch, which he did. So I told him to do a libun kal to sort of briefly blowtorch that part of the knife where the crevice is between the handle and the knife, and then to do hagala, to kasher them in boiling water. And by the way, just a useful tip, usually when you kasher something, so either you have a kashering pot, or after you kasher the knives, now you have to kasher the pot. Now, kashering the knives is no big deal, but kashering the pot makes a mess and it makes water everywhere. So there's a good tip that you could do. Instead of kashering in a pot, you buy a can of pickles for $3, and you empty the can of pickles, and you boil up water in that can, and you dip the knives in, and even if it doesn't fit the whole entire knife in one go, you do half the knife, and then you turn it over, bring it back to a rolling boil, and put the other half of the knife in, and then you just throw out the tin, and you don't need to bother with the hassle or the mess of kashering a pot. Ashreinu that we have such archava, that we have, so everything is cheap and disposable. All right. One more shaila, again, not a very uncommon shaila, but not necessarily one that you've encountered, and one that could be is interesting in a number of different moving parts to this shaila. So, somebody came to shul Friday night this week, right after Isur Chag was Friday, came Friday night. His wife made chala that day for Shabbos, and she was mafresh chala, and it's a hectic Friday, and somehow in the chaos of things, the piece of dough that she had set aside as hafroshas chala had gotten mixed in to the chala. So now the chala you're not allowed to eat. Certainly somebody who's not a kohen is not allowed to eat it. and so now he has all the chala, and he even had guests for Shabbat. What are you going to eat? So Hadei Bishul Akum that it's actually a clear, explicit halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So near the day, Shin Chav Gimel, steht azoi. Chala chutz laaretz shemuter. Chala chutz laaretz, chala in outside of Eretz Yisrael. Shemuteres lekohen toir mikeri, which is permissible to be eaten by a kohen who has been to mikvah. Rashai laochlem zar shulchan achad. So the kohen is allowed. We've discussed in the past that in practice, we don't. I'm sorry, Benti, do you mind to bring a plastic cup from there for the water? I need the. In practice nowadays, for the most part, a kohen doesn't eat chala, but strictly speaking, a kohen is allowed to eat chala that from outside of Eretz Yisrael, given certain requirements met. Lefi she'einu medamas, because why is a kohen allowed to eat his piece of challah and an azar allowed to eat his regular piece of bread at the same table? Because chalas chutz laaretz einu medamas afilu nisar v'shava b'shava. If challah of chutz laaretz gets mixed in with regular dough, it doesn't forbid the dough, even if it's equals, even if you have Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'shakal midvarei. If you're just drinking water to clear your throat, then you don't say a bracha, but I am also thirsty. So even if, let's say you have a 1 ounce piece of challah and a 1 ounce piece of regular dough and they mix together, it's permissible. That is the opinion of the mechaber. And presumably Sfardim would follow this. However, for us Ashkenazim, the Ramah says, Yesh chokim, that if a piece of challah, when I say the word challah, I don't mean what we call challah bread. I mean the piece of dough that you used, that you took the mitzvah of challah from. If that mixed in with other dough, and the Paskim explain this means whether it actually mixed in, or it's just like we said before, yavish b'yavish. You can't differentiate. You have one ball of dough that's havrashas challah and another ball of dough that's regular dough. So it forbids it until you have 101 times the amount. So if you imhu b'mina, if it's the same species, which in this case it was exactly the same dough, right? So if you have one bowl of challah and 100 times bowls of not challah, then it would be permissible. But the assumption is usually that would not be the case. Usually a batch of dough is not 100 times the amount that you mafresh challah. If the dough of the avrashas challah says that I'm mixed in back into the dough, and you don't have 101 times to nullify it, if you have not yet eaten the bread, so what should you do? Yishal l'chachem aleha v'yatalei neder v'nishalan ala ha'kteshus v'yachse v'yitel chala acheres. Says the Ramah, there's a very good eitzah. What made this piece of dough challah? You declared, you made the bracha, and you declared that this piece of dough is challah, right? So your declaration can be undone with the process of hataras nedarim. You nullify a vow. You could also nullify. So you could nullify the fact. You could undo the fact that that piece of dough is challah. The same Torah that says that your words have the power to create the status that this piece of dough is challah. You have the power through having a chacham be mater neder, three chachamim. Not three chachamim, 3 people or 1 chacham. To be mater neder. So then, you could undo the fact that it's challah. So here it's already Shabbos, right? She has all these beautiful challahs on her table, and the problem is that there's somewhere in this challah there's mixed in a piece of, somewhere in the bread there's mixed in a piece of challah. We have to differentiate our terms, right? So the answer is you should have the woman who made the challah be mater neder and make it ois challah. And now there's no challah mixed in to the bread. So are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? The answer is yes. The halacha is in Hilchos Nedarim, also in Yeridei Siman Reish Chav Ches. It says, "Afilu me'umad of a krevim of a laila of a Shabbos." You're even allowed to do Hataras Nedarim on Shabbos. I feel even if you had an opportunity to do Hataras Nedarim before Shabbos and you didn't do it just because whatever reason. However, Shabbos, as long as the Hataras Nedarim is for Tzorech Shabbos, so for the need of Shabbos. So if you want to do Hataras Nedarim, I don't know, you have a minhag not to eat, I don't know, whatever it is, and you have a minhag to keep a certain chumrah that for whatever reason you can't keep any more and you need to do Hataras Nedarim. So then, so you do it after. If you didn't do it before Shabbos, you do it after Shabbos. But if it's something that's relevant on Shabbos, like in this case, we need to eat chala on Shabbos, and we need to do, we're not allowed to eat it, so then you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. So step one is...
There's another problem though, isn't there?
What?
Because if you're mafresh chala on Shabbos...
Hold on. So step one is we have to get rid of the problem. So I'll get that. So step one, we go to her house. Myself and two other people went to the house. We sat down. She told us the whole story. She explained how she now regrets having designated that piece of dough, which subsequently got mixed into the others as chala, and we declared mutalach, and that chala is no longer chala, and that's it. There's never been hafrashas chala. So now, I think this is where Ari was going. We have a new problem in our hands. The problem we have now in our hands is that we have the challah here on Shabbos, the bread. We have bread, and you want mafresh challah from the bread. Are you allowed to eat bread that you want mafresh challah from? No. Are you allowed to be mafresh challah on Shabbos? No. But the answer is you're wrong. You're not allowed to be mafresh challah on Shabbos, but outside of Eretz Yisrael, you are allowed to eat bread that you weren't mafresh challah from, because you could do it afterwards. And that's the next halacha in, one second, it's the next halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in the same simon in Shin Chof Gimel, where it says...
No, but you can also separate one to shape. Yes, and so...
Here, Simon Shin Chof Gimel, in the same sieve, Simon Shin Chof Gimel, sieve Aleph, it says, we're talking specifically about outside of Eretz Yisrael. If you want to eat your bread first, and only to separate the chala after you've already eaten part of the bread, mutar, it's permissible. Because the whole mitzvah of chala and chutz la'aretz is only rabbinic. However, the Rama adds, you have to leave over more than the chala that you're going to separate, because you have to separate from something. The mitzvah of chala is to separate it. So, now, Ari is correct that the minhag is not to do so. The minhag is that we always make sure to separate the chala before we eat it. Not only before we eat it, we usually makbid to separate the chala before we bake it. And by the way, there's an interesting thing in halacha. The Mishnah says in Shabbos that a person is obligated before Shabbos to ask his wife to remind her, will you mafresh chala? Right? Reb Zev, do you ask your wife? Reb Zev doesn't. You don't do it.
Yeah, I sometimes ask, why don't you remind me?
He tells you to remind her?
So Reb Zev, I'm gonna back you up. I'm gonna back over. I'm gonna back you up over here. No, but the Eruv we do once a year, and the Shabbos candles, taka the minhag is that the husband prepares them. But what about the challah? So the Alter Rebbe says in Siman Reish Samach, Benzi, the Alter Rebbe says in Siman Reish Samach Sif Hey that toiv, it's a good thing to ask, will you mafresh challah before Shabbos? Why is it a good thing but not an obligation? Says the Alter Rebbe, because the whole thing that it's an obligation to ask is only in Eretz Yisrael, where you can't eat the challah, you can't eat the bread if you weren't mafresh challah. So you have to remind him before Shabbos, because come Shabbos, now if you didn't separate challah, you're not going to be able to eat it, right? But outside of Eretz Yisrael, over there in chutz la'aretz, even if you didn't take challah before Shabbos, you could take challah after Shabbos, because the halacha is that you're allowed to eat the bread and leave over some of the bread and be mafresh challah at a later stage. So therefore, it's no longer an obligation to ask before Shabbos will you mafresh challah. It's only a good thing to do. By the way, l'choira, according to this Alter Rebbe, there perhaps in Eretz Yisrael there would be a chiyuv to ask, and I'm not sure. I don't think that's the practice. I don't think that people in Eretz Yisrael nowadays have the practice to make sure to ask the wife if they were mafresh chala, but maybe they should, according to this Alter Rebbe. Again, that requires further investigation. But practically speaking, even though the minhag is to be mafresh chala before you bake it, and certainly before you eat it, but Meikar Hadin, strictly speaking, that's not necessary. And so I told this woman, leave one of your chalas, leave an entire challah over to after Shabbos, entire loaf of bread over till after Shabbos, and after Shabbos, you'll take a piece of that bread and designate that as challah, and that sort of retroactively covers the rest of the challah.
You can tell her to say a bracha.
Yes, so he brings it, most poskim say that you could do it with a bracha, yes.
You're saying the be doing it afterwards.
Yeah. The only reason not to do it with a bracha l'chayra would be because the Taz holds that you can't do hataras nedarim on the challah. So the fishitas hataz the hataras nedarim didn't accomplish anything. B'meila you were already mafresh challah, so you can't be mafresh challah again. But the ma'aseh, it seems that it's not. The normative psak seems to be, at least I didn't have a chance to mamish look up all the sources. I tried to look up everything in the original source, not in the Malaktim, but I do have here Chalkas Binyamin, which is a very nice Malakat on the halachas of Hafrashas Chala, and at least according to the sources that he quotes, it does seem that the normative psak would be to be mafresh Chala again with the bracha.
There was no hesitancy to do this in terms of what you're doing is, okay, you're removing her hafrasha that she did originally. You're making it that it was never really an hafrasha.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, that sounds great, right? But also what you're doing the mafreya is making it the bracha that she made originally was a bracha of atala.
Right. L'maaseh he brings that svara and some achrayim, but l'maaseh l'Rama is not choshesh to that.
Not choshesh.
The Rama says you could do hataras nedarim. The Rama doesn't say you can't do it. Again, I have to understand that would also mean that she would have to throw out all the challah. She wouldn't be able to eat any of the bread. But the Rama is not choshesh to that. The Rama said, you did a mitzvah, and now it's a good question, and it gets into the lamdas of exactly bracha levatala, how it works. But all right.
That's the most complicated.